So without further ado, it's now my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Ryan Sharpson. Ryan has over 20 years of telecom field installation and maintenance experience. He teaches many courses for Global Knowledge, including Palo Alto Networks, SonicWall, and Avaya Technologies. He is the lead subject matter expert when Global Knowledge has a requirement for lab development when rolling out new classes and updates. And finally, he receives high marks from customers for his teaching style and product knowledge. So without further ado, Ryan, I'm going to turn it over to you and start the webinar.
Thank you, Kevin. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for spending a few minutes of your day. We know you've got lots of things in the air today, and probably having to fit in a lunchtime webinar is not always easy, but this topic is really important, and I'm excited to share with you the material before you hear and answer any questions that you may have. So last year, as we all know, the world underwent a huge change. No one escaped being affected, and certainly not our workforce. So this was a perfect timing to begin the security everywhere discussion. If you have not been introduced to the Palo Alto Networks family of security products, what we call the PAN-OS platform, this is a wonderful opportunity to engage in some discussion for future networking design, adaptation, and certainly security and controls. This course material actually comes from one of the many courses Global Knowledge is fortunate enough to be an authorized training partner, and we deliver Global Knowledge training classes, including what we call the Firewall Essentials, a very small component of the overall platform, but obviously an incredibly important cornerstone aspect to any network security, whether on-premise, a brick-and-mortar locations, cloud-based resources, remote workers. Everyone can be affected by this network security discussion. So in our introduction here, we spent some time looking at the overall Palo Alto Networks portfolio. I'm so blessed to be a part of Global Knowledge and our worldwide training team, and I feel so fortunate to be included with the Palo Alto Networks education team and, of course, the worldwide global enablement team. Their goal is, of course, to provide the highest degree of support, education, and training to accommodate a network security solution for any potential organization. So we'll talk about the portfolio and the pieces that make up our security team. We'll also spend a few minutes talking about what we often refer to as a next-gen firewall. Now, that terminology for many of you may be very familiar in past UTM environments. There have certainly been different firewall architectures. The PAN-OS was designed to improve throughput and reduce latency and other quality issues while maintaining the highest degree of security on a day-to-day, minute-by-minute basis. And we'll have an opportunity to kind of see where might your organization fit. So we're going to talk about the course. Again, any of those of you that might not be brand new to PAN-OS or the Palo Alto Networks product line. Remember, when you start to research additional resources and information, keep in mind Global Knowledge, and Kevin will remind us some really good options. But when you're interacting with Global Knowledge, our www.globalknowledge.com, remember, this is one of our courses that you can find there, what we call the 210 course. So let's dive right in, folks. This, again, would be an introduction for students that might be very highly trained and skilled firewall admins. Certainly, you probably have an administrative team in your environment, and these days their plates are full. So the first thing we want to introduce are the components and the players that make up the PAN portfolio. We also want to talk about one of the terms that has been kind of a newcomer in the network security, a single pass architecture, really specifically targeting minimization of latency and delay while maintaining throughput and security. And of course, there'll be a few models of firewall. These days, the first question out of everyone's mouth is, can I run a VM? And so let's take a look at some of these things. And certainly, any of the information that we cover here today, more information is available on our website and obviously our partner, Palo Alto Networks website as well. So our portfolio, let's take a quick look at our rebranding. The first bug that I'd like to put in all of your ears is with the COVID impact on the world. All companies, to some degree, were impacted. Palo Alto Networks has taken this challenge and has met this challenge head on. And during the deep impact that we've dealt with over the last year, a heavy drive towards rebranding and reorganization of the security-related elements that we all need has been released with what we call the Strata, Prisma, and Cortex product divisions. So when we talk about Strata, that family of products, that's the firewall. That's your perimeter firewall. But it's also data center technology, Internet of Things, even cellular. So when we talk about the Strata, that's where you can fine-tune your focus into the firewall-related elements. Now, a lot of you folks are probably seeing more and more cloud-based architectures. At Global Knowledge, we often develop a lot of lab environments, and in those cases, it's really very feasible for an organization to utilize a cloud-based lab. Why purchase a brick-and-mortar location when the cloud offers some organizations everything they need? However, cloud-based security is becoming more and more a focal point. Well, that's where Prisma, the Prisma terminology comes into play. And so if you are more involved in cloud-based firewalls and lab resource environments, you are not on-premise enterprise locations. Maybe you have remote users. So our public cloud offering, the software as a service type applications that all of your people are working with right now. And then certainly users that are remote, they may be working from home here in Dallas, Texas, where I live, or maybe next week, Global Knowledge sends me to California or even another country. The secure access capabilities of Prisma bring those new technologies to light, and things like Global Protect, a remote user VPN capability, is not only being enhanced from our standard IPsec client VPN, it's really being included in some of this future development and continuing development. Finally, the third piece of our three amigos here, the automation is a huge improvement goal in the Palo Alto Networks platform. All of our firewalls communicate with cloud-based intelligence systems. And so when I ask students each day, how often do you think new threats are created? And certainly that's on a very continuous basis. So the Cortex piece has been provided now to automate some of our analysis and intelligence techniques. As you can see, anything from detection and response to threats to the automation of our maintenance activities, and even our analytics can be automated. So when you're making your notes with these Palo Alto Networks terms, remember, cloud-based, those topics fall under the Prisma umbrella. The firewall and the various firewall security functionalities, those are Strata umbrella elements. And finally, the Cortex is one of our newest members for the for the automation and intelligence. So let's dive in and see how all these pieces work together. So our goal in the PAN-OS, just like any network security administrator, can I see what's going through my network? One of our standard deployment mechanisms with Palo Alto Networks is, oddly enough, to provide visibility to a future client that may have a Firewall X slated for replacement. We put a Palo Alto Networks firewall in what we call a vWire mode in line with that Firewall X. And oftentimes, the administrators of that Firewall X are baffled and astounded with the visibility they did not have that they do achieve. And they can see, I thought my firewall was blocking all the latest and greatest threats, and now with the PAN-OS visibility added, I can see that there were some gaps in my protection. One of the biggest terms you'll ever hear with Palo Alto Networks is a term called App ID. Now, we don't have enough time, unfortunately, today for my normal description or delivery, but I can give you this. If a user should be allowed to visit, let's say, Salesforce in order to do their daily job functions, but that same user should be never allowed to communicate with Facebook. App ID allows us not only to control the authorized applications, even if web browsing is involved in both of those aforementioned tools, we can look deeper at layer 7 and reduce our attack surface by not only creating a very important list of applications that should be allowed, but also the firewall's technology will work to control and block unauthorized applications, therefore helping us prevent some of these vulnerabilities that exist. We have a signature database that grows every second of every minute of every day. Just as an example, our antivirus signatures with Palo Alto Networks, certainly we cooperate with other threat intelligence communities and databases, but our updates to our firewalls can happen once a day, just virus signatures alone. And so staying up to date will help us produce that protection where we know even threats in the future can be comfortably protected. So known threats today, protection from unknown threats that may happen in the future. It's all part of our Palo Alto Networks platform. Now, this is something really important, what we call the machine learning. It's the foundation of our platform. I've heard students and admins say things like, oh, the firewall is learning. It's in learning mode. And so to a degree, I like that term because it does illustrate the foundation of our platform is not static. It is to continually evolve and grow based on your specific environment and requirements. And let's be honest, your threat landscape. Panorama here on this second bullet can be involved in the PAN-OS protection of your enterprise. And how does that happen? Well, Panorama centralizes the day-to-day administrative tasks. So let's say that my colleague there, Kevin, is in charge of the 500 firewalls Global Knowledge has in all our locations across the world. Well, Panorama then can enhance that administrator's capabilities by allowing a central login. I can log into one central server and make changes to those 500 firewalls all at once, or I can push out individual changes to different groups of devices based on their geography, etc. Now, in addition, Panorama is also a logging function. Our firewalls produce a very important set of log activities, and all of that logging information can also be very centralized. When we talk about our known threats, you may say, but Ryan, what about something that maybe there's a teenager in some dark room in some state of the United States or even overseas, and they are developing some unknown threat, so they can target some company or some enterprise? Well, we have what we call zero-day protection with Wildfire, a proprietary tool. It again is what I refer to as a sandbox in the cloud. Now, if your users download a lot of files every day, those files can be candidates to be submitted for further analysis. And Wildfire, if you're interested, is a wildly popular zero-day threat analysis engine. Global Protect, as I mentioned, is another remote user protection mechanism. It's a standard VPN with a lot of extra bells and whistles. And as I mentioned, Global Protect is being rolled more and more into our cloud-based access. I work with some admins that have years of experience, and they've never once touched a physical Palo Alto Networks firewall. Everything they have and deploy and administer is in the cloud. Their users are largely connecting from wherever, and it's all cloud-based. Another term that a lot of you are probably seeing out there, the software-defined wide area network routing functionality. With all of these branch offices and headquarter locations and remote users, the effective routing of traffic from the remote users is really the big focus of our SD-WAN function. So as you can see, the terminologies that you're hearing out there in any form factor are certainly very highly developed in the PAN development team moving forward as well. So when we talk about the cloud, there's a couple of real elements to it. Continuous monitoring of firewalls and networks that are in the cloud, or continual protection and analysis of the endpoint as that user travels the world. So keep in mind that every element, Prisma, that's a big umbrella, and there's a lot of interesting subtopics. Securing the automation. Again, each one of these is now being developed as not only a unique topic, but a specific discipline. Let me give you folks just a little background. It was a week or so ago, we were thrilled to be able to share 3-hour workshops with Palo Alto Networks administrators. A lot of these folks were, and there were hundreds per session, that were familiar with PAN-OS. They had some administrative experience. They were now preparing themselves for certification. One of the new items that I included in that presentation were these individual, I call them disciplines, because I found out that a lot of my admins I was working with, they weren't going to work on the firewall, the Strata functionality. It was more of the Cortex, the automation, and the analysis techniques. So our Cortex data lake, well, it's a cloud-based, centralized log storage. Cortex XDR, we used to have what we called traps and endpoint protection. This XDR is a rebranded and modernized software protection element on the actual, it goes where the user goes on their endpoint. And of course, then our response technologies, automating some of the behaviors that may be triggered. So folks, you are looking at the latest and greatest development subjects in the Palo Alto Networks universe. Now, a little closer to home, again, in my trainings, I am specifically focused on the firewall. Now, whatever discipline would be most close a fit for you or your organization, the firewall behavior and the PAN-OS behavior I find are critical. So let's dive in and understand, what do you mean when you say single pass parallel process? In the past, I've worked with many security systems that had a networked approach. And so, of course, you had your networking, you had your antivirus, you had your intrusion prevention, you might even have had URL control. But the idea of the old way of doing things was, once the packet arrived, well, the networking information needed to be parsed while it's paused here and buffered. But then we had to buffer that packet again for the antivirus analysis. Then it was buffered again for the intrusion, and even further delay introduced by buffering that packet so we could now look at the URL. Well, that's where the single pass parallel process comes in. A packet or a frame is going to be pulled off the wire, and here's my silly analogy. If you're a race fan, how would you feel if your driver was in the lead of the race and pulled into the pit and said, I have got a brilliant idea. Give me one left tire, front left, and send me back out. I'm going to do another lap. And then you can do the right front tire. And I'll go around again, over and over. Well, that's the single pass parallel process has been defined to apply all of the maintenance and controls on the single pass. Now, it's very technical, but it is a simple thing to think about. So when the packet arrives, there you see our app ID. Not only are the source addresses and ports and destination addresses and ports, all of those typical networking things are analyzed. And things like zone protection. And we've got a giant, our pit crew is about 50 people, okay? If we enable all of these functions, they may be even changing the cap on the stem where the tire gets aired up. So I'm being silly here, but you understand that it's a big improvement when our analysis techniques that you see here are all applied in a single pass. So our rules are configured in a way that apply the appropriate controls and processes and inspections. And as you can see, each individual element is certainly involved in what we call parallel processing, things happening at once. Here's another silly analogy, and then I'll move the slide. But let's say you and I were both hired to be security people, and we're watching an airport entry point. Well, let's say that I am the app ID inspection engine. Okay, well, you are the content ID inspection engine. All right, well, the suitcase is going to go through the x-ray machine. I'm on my side looking. I'm looking for, I don't know, I'm looking for Facebook or Gmail or YouTube. I'm looking at the bits and bytes in the payload, layer 7 section of the packet. But at the same time that I'm looking for those, you are on the other side, you're analyzing for our virus signatures that we match. You're looking for a intrusion or other type of threat, even social security numbers that might be sensitive information. So while I'm watching the payload for my matches, you're simultaneously in parallel watching the payload for the threats. And that's how we accomplish what we call the single pass parallel process. Now, under the hood, you see here we have two different control and data planes. And so if you imagine all of this processing taking place, well, you can imagine under the hood, we've got some pretty significant, powerful chipsets in some cases, software modules in other cases. But irregardless if you have a VM or a standalone physical firewall, you've got these players and processes in place. The control plane is what I call the brain of the entire operation. And so the control plane is not only responsible for managing the live, what we call the running config, but anytime configuration changes are made, it's the management plane or the brain's responsibility to write those changes into memory. Now, the brain is responsible to tell the arms and legs what to do. So here's my arms, and down at the bottom, I'll see my little feet. And so when the configuration changes are made, it's the actual data plane that is responsible for things like processing the source and destination information, processing the allowed and non-allowed applications, etc., and housing our signatures that we are going to search through. This is an important distinction. So they work together, but just remember that single pass parallel process really makes everything happen. Now, our final discussion here, the operating system of this corporation, we call PAN-OS, is consistent across the family of products. Now, what that means to you is no matter large or small, the feature set available within the PAN-OS is available to any and every licensed customer. We've got firewalls for small home office type environments. We've got mid-range, and we've got even larger enterprise firewall technology. And of course, it doesn't get any bigger than the PA7000 series, a multi-slot cabinet arrangement. So you can see something for every organization, even if you're just getting started with a new startup company. PAN-OS is going to be a great partner for you throughout your growth and your expansion. Sometimes we will take a single firewall and actually create virtual logical firewalls inside that we refer to as a vSys. Now, the vSys is, again, a separate boundary. So if I've got a HR department, I may control their traffic with vSys A. If I've got let's say a financial or sales, so that creates a separate boundary, not only for the resources and traffic, but also for the administrators. And certainly those vSYSs have access to the physical resources of the actual box, but that's all coordinated through what we call the vSys approach. Now, many of you are interested. You may even have your own VMware environment as we sit here today. Obviously, a huge part of any deployment can be the virtual machines that make up our little vSys organization chart here. So from the small 50 all the way to the larger devices, we maintain all of our signature features. And as you can see, the throughputs vary based on designation and setup. Beyond the physical and virtual boxes, there's now a special series. Some of you may be familiar with what we call the Kubernetes clusters. And that's Kubernetes. So it's a specialized clustering function, and we have a CN series, a container native series that is specific for these types of environments. And with the release of 10, PAN-OS 10, we now have the ability to incorporate into these Kubernetes clusters a specifically packaged and bundled PAN-OS firewall. So, as you can see, it's a real exciting time at Palo Alto Networks. I want to remind you folks that I've got a few minutes here before my class this afternoon resumes. Very happy to field questions in your chat window. If you have a question, now's a good time to start thinking about that question, and certainly type that question. And so at the point you have a question available, Kevin's going to assist me. And we'll pause here. I do have a couple of other slides related to courses, but I'll stay here for any questions we have. Kevin, tell me what we have, sir.
Sure. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for that great information. So I think you might have touched on this, but it's good to reinforce it. One question that did come through was, does the cloud version of PAN firewalls support AWS or VMware systems or both?
Yes, either. AWS, yes, and VMware systems, yes. Google Cloud Platform, and something referred to as Alibaba. So different cloud environments, yes, and certainly Amazon is one of them. All
right, great. So Jason had a question, will there be training offered again? So Jason, yeah, Global Knowledge offers a full portfolio of PAN-OS training. Ryan, we'll jump in that in the coming slides, but we certainly have these classes delivered on a frequent basis, whether you want to take it in a public setting or if you want to hold it privately for your organization. We could do either or. So definitely reach out to your account manager or visit globalknowledge.com to see what that schedule looks like. All right, so we have another question come in. What is available for OCI? Ryan, are you, does that ring a bell for you?
If you can define that term for me, define that acronym.
Yeah, that's what I wasn't 100% sure. Oracle Cloud, gotcha.
Oh, so gotcha. Yes. Well, I tell you, there are a couple of websites that I find to be, without question, one of my go-to tools. There's a live.paloaltonetworks.com. That website, and I won't go off track here, but if you go into that website, they let you search for feature terms, questions you may have regarding the operating system. The Oracle Cloud right now, at least in my own little small world, my focus, I don't have a lot of information, but I'm certainly, that's likely to be a very well-versed and documented topic. The live.paloaltonetworks.com or just the paloaltonetworks.com if you're just looking for roadmap. Either of those websites would most likely tell you where the OCI is positioned on the current roadmap. Great question.
All right. I'm looking through here to see if we have any further questions before we jump into the next portion. So the one question maybe I have for you, Ryan, that if you want to expand upon, can you give it a kind of an idea of how a formal class would work in terms of how involved the hands-on portion is?
Oh, I'd love to. I would love to. So one of my courses I'm responsible for is I'll put it in the chat, because if you're looking at our website or even the PAN website, they call it PAN EDU 210. Now, in the last 2-3 months, they have released a new version. It's version 10. And in the previous version, I would say there was about a 60-40 split. 60% of what was learned was hands-on. Obviously, we cover a lot of slides, but it was really heavily slanted. They've even improved on that. So I would say it is way beyond 50-50 split. The hands-on portion of our current 210 class may be more like, 65-35, because there's a lot. Everything you learn about, you turn around and do that and demonstrate and validate that in the lab environment. So it is, without question, hands-on intensive. Great question.
All right, great. There was another question that did pop through. So if you want to go to the Q&A, you can see this as I read it. I imagine each size of the hardware firewall has limit of the number of virtual firewalls permitted on the platform. What are the maximum permitted virtual firewalls for each of the hardware platforms?
Oh, they do scale, and there's way too many to just spout them out right now. But on the website, there's a comparison document. You probably would be pretty limited with the small firewall, like a 210 or a 220 now. And so they do scale the devices. Some of them may allow 10 or more. I just would have to look at the documentation. But yes, Palo Alto Networks model comparison. If anybody's interested in that, I'll type that in, Palo Alto Networks. I don't know, I just put model comparison. It may be firewall comparison. They've got a real nice spreadsheet that shows you maximum zones, maximum connections, maximum, every type of maximum, and the V systems would be part of that as well. So off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you if there's a maximum of 100 for the big devices, but I'm certain that it scales. Good question.
Okay, there's another question that popped through regarding certifications. So the question pertains to, are the certifications operating system or version centric?
That's a really, really good question. I would say the operating system. They're not, because, and here's why I say this. Kevin and I work with a lot of clients and custom sessions that we work to build. He'll understand what I mean here. If you were to learn today about the PAN-OS, some of the things have not changed, and they will never change, even from when I learned about it in version 6. So the operating system behaviors certainly grows, and new features are added. So 10's got a couple of bells and whistles. But if you're using 8 or 9, and you come sit in a class with me in 10, you're going to learn everything you need, because the underlying objects and rules, the single pass parallel process, all of those things are consistent. And so I would say for, with some minor adjustments, there will be questions on each exam. It's a 2-year certification process. And so when you certify with the current version, they may ask you a new feature question, but largely the certification is built on the solid understanding of the overall operating system, even going back many years and versions. Super question.
Yep, I agree with that. So thank you for that one. That looks like...
Do we have a feedback form, Kevin? There's a question here, and I forget, do we have them do a feedback? Shake has asked about a feedback form.
I will have to look into that. I know we do that obviously for our formal classes, but for the webinars, I'm not sure if a survey is sent out, but I will take that task to find that out.
I'll add this for the group, and thanks for that question, Shake. Kevin will certainly have some answer on that. I'm going to put my email. If there's anything you heard that you want to comment on, or you might want just a little sidebar conversation, I'm happy to do that in the evenings. If there's any feedback you'd like to provide, I'll certainly make sure that, the marketing team and my management team. So if you don't hear anything immediately, Shake, and you'd like to send me some feedback for our own information, ryan.sharpston@globalknowledge.com. I'm happy to assist. So shoot me whatever you have, and I'll make sure that it gets seen.
All right, so we're got a few more, a few more minutes here, so we can certainly answer more questions. But Ryan, if you want to jump to the next screen, we can go over some options for people to consider. So as we discussed, we have a full portfolio of Palo Alto Networks training. Some of the classes that would be beneficial based on today's conversation include the Firewall 10.0 Essentials Configuration and Management course. So that's what this presentation was built off of. Obviously, we will go in more depth in the actual 5-day class. And that is, as Ryan's writing, is referred to as PAN-OS EDU 210. And then another class to follow on there, it's kind of more advanced, is a troubleshooting class. That's EDU 330. So these are really good classes to consider. Another one would be if you're managing firewalls at scale, there's a panorama device. So there's a class on that specifically. And that would be EDU 220, correct? Yep, there you go.
Yep.
Very good there. So if you want to go to the next slide. So as a benefit for attending today's webinar, we would like to offer everyone a 25% discount off your next Global Knowledge Delivered course. So if you're looking to take a PAN-OS training class, feel free to utilize the promo code that you see on the screen, or you can contact your Global Knowledge account manager and work out a discount through that individual. The discount is not just on Palo Alto Networks. So if there's another training class you see in our catalog of courses, feel free to ask your account manager if that discount can be applied for that course. Finally, be sure to continue to visit Global Knowledge website, so www.globalknowledge.com, for additional free resources like technical articles, white papers, and webinars. So let me jump back over to the Q&A and see if there's anything else. Cyril, I think you said good morning, so good morning to you as well. Did you have a specific question? If you do, please feel free to type it in the Q&A feature, and then we will hang on just for a few more moments. But that really concludes what we wanted to cover today. So thank you for attending, and this concludes today's webinar.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
Yep. Thank you, Ryan. All right, Ryan, we did get one more question to come through if you're still on.
Yes.
The question was, are there online manuals that they can look at? So Michael, you asked that question. I'm not sure. Are you referring to the training portion of that, or are you looking at the actual technical manuals that you would get from Palo Alto Networks? So Ryan, I don't know if you see that question. So he's actually looking at the actual manuals for PAN-OS. Do you know if those are available online somewhere?
I do, yes. And I'm going to go ahead and change the view you have here. So hold on. Bear with me, folks. I've got some other screens that are most likely blocking. So let's look where anyone, now, of course, this will depend on your partner or customer relationship, but if you would, let's go to, I tell you what, let's say you're just a customer right now. One of my favorites is docs.paloaltonetworks.com. And I'll put this in the chat because if you're interested in documentation, this is a really good place to start your search. Now, when I say documentation, I mean like the admin guide. So I may say, I don't know, just searching here, just typing in the admin guide. And obviously there's version selections. So what you see on the screen right here, now, did you notice I didn't have to log in? Now I have a partner account. You might not. But if you don't, this is a great way. There's the administrative guide for our firewall running 9.1 software. Here's a panorama admin guide. Now these aren't class. These are more day-to-day administrative resources. And so that's a great place to find your admin guides, user guides, and things of that nature. Now, one more comment, if you are interested from a student perspective, let me put this, which we used to call the Learning Center. Well, it still is a learning center. They just changed the name of it. Now, here you do have to log in. So if you've never been a partner, customer, had a relationship with Palo Alto Networks, well, by golly, now's a great time. You can create yourself an account. To some degree, you probably can create like a guest type account if you're not yet a fully fledged customer or partner. But once you are able to log into this Beacon website, now you can find study guides. This would be useful for me to study for one of the certification exams. Heck, here's even the top tier certification exam, what we call the PCNSE. So if you're just looking for freely available admin guides, the Docs website, and if you're interested in learner type resources, the Beacon website. I hope that helps.
Yep, thanks, Ryan. I put that also in the Q&A. It's in the chat as well as the Q&A, so that you guys can grab that. So that I'm looking back at the Q&A feature. There are no other open questions. So at this time, we're going to thank you again for your attendance, and we're going to close out today's webinar. Thanks, Ryan, for all the information you provided.
Absolutely. I sure enjoyed it. Everybody have a great rest of your week, and thanks for spending a little time with Global Knowledge.